Ripper's Snarfangs are a band of vicious grots who were exiled from their tribe from trying to overthrow its leader, but one day they'll be back for their revenge. In this video, we're going to show you how to paint these miniatures by showing you how to paint Ripper himself, and by following the methods and techniques we're going to show you, you'll be able to paint the entire warband. Now, these miniatures are packed with character and they're incredibly dynamic, and I've been looking forward to painting one of these for a long time. So without further ado, let's get started. As with any Citadel miniature, the first thing you should do with Ripper's Snarfangs is to undercoat them, and for these miniatures we recommend Mechanica Standard Grey Spray, which you can see is what I've sprayed my miniature with just here, because this is a great starting point for the wolf in particular, which is where we're going to start painting, and we're going to be using dry brushing here. So it's a good idea to do all this first of all, because this technique will catch other details, but we'll neaten those details up as we start painting them in later on. The first paint we need is Dawnstone, and we're going to be dry brushing this on using a medium dry brush. And to do this, what you should do is just get a little bit of the paint under the tip of your brush like this, then get some tissue and use it to work the paint into the bristles and also to get rid of the excess paint as well. And once you've got rid of most of the paint, you're then ready to start applying it to the miniature. Now, the application for this is a little bit specific. What you want to do is take a close look at the model for recessed details. For example, if we look at the muscles on the hind leg just here, you want to always angle the brush so that rather you're painting like this, that the bristles fall into the recessed area, you want to go across quickly like that so the bristles can't fall into the recessed area, and that way you keep the darker colour showing. So for example, I'm going to, on this leg here, I'm going to start applying the paint like this, and you can see this way I get a nice highlight appearing on those raised parts, whereas the recessed parts stay darker. So when we get to the textured fur, it's the same technique, but we just need to change the angle. So in this case, it's going to be going downwards like this, and you see here, once again, it gives a really nice highlight. So all you need to do now is just work your way across the wolf doing this. Well, whilst you're doing this, don't forget to make sure you get the wolf tails on the helmet up here, and also the fur trim on the helmet as well. Once you finish dry brushing that fur, you're then ready to move on to the next stage. Now, what we're going to do now is darken down some of those recessed areas by using a contrast paint, which will also add a nice bit of definition to the miniature. We're going to use Basilicanum Grey here, and we're going to dilute it using contrast medium. The reason why we're going to use contrast medium here is because we don't want the colour to be very strong as we apply it. It needs to be a nice subtle bit of shading here. And the reason why we're using contrast medium rather than water for this is because it allows us to dilute the paint without changing its properties. This way it'll ensure a nice smooth finish once it's dry. So what we're going to go for here is a roughly 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to start out with Basilicanum Grey so you can see what I'm doing. I'm using a medium shade brush for this. I'm just going to get a good brush full and put it onto the palette there like that. And then make sure the brush is clean before I get any of the medium so I don't contaminate it with any colour. We want 1 and then 2. And there we go, and then mix those together. So you see, this way I'm getting a very dilute version of the colour. And all we need to do is apply a single thin coat of this all across all the fur of the miniature, and that includes the stuff that's on the helmet as well. So all you need to do is start painting it on like this, just letting it run into the recessed areas, and it gives some really lovely shading whilst not darkening down the raised areas too much. So all you need to do now is apply it all over the fur and then give the miniature about 20 minutes to dry. Once the contrast paint is completely dry, we're then going to add another dry brush to the miniature, this time using Administratum Grey to make it a little bit lighter, but only in certain areas. So for that reason, I'm going to be using a small dry brush now for a little bit more control, but as earlier, what you do is get some of this paint onto your brush, then get some tissue and work the paint into the bristles like that until you've only got a small amount left. So what we're aiming to do here is to avoid certain areas, mainly the back of the wolf. So we're looking at avoiding around there, going all the way down the back and the base of the tail around there. But everywhere else, we want to very lightly start applying this like this. So you see this way, I'm going upwards, moving towards the top, and this way I can control having a lighter area of fur at the bottom and a darker area at the top. And the same is true when you get into areas such as the face, just very lightly go like this to start to build up a highlight there. And the same is true in these smoother areas such as the muscle here. Just very lightly start applying this so you slowly start to build up a lighter colour, but all the while just be careful to avoid that central part of the back so that it stays darker around those parts. And now I've finished applying that lighter dry brush, and now we're going to return back to Basilicanum Grey, but this time in a much more selective way than what we did previously. So I'm going to use a medium layer brush to apply it now, and I'm going to use the palette to help me control exactly how much I'm applying at once. You want to make sure your brush isn't overloaded here so that you don't lose control of it, but just load it like this. And then what we're aiming to do is to start applying this to the darker areas of the fur, which is kind of the top of the head, then running down the back. So all you do is just start painting this down the central part of the back like this, just running it into the texture and bringing it onto the head as well, just along here and down down the centre of the muzzle. Now with this, what you can do is, once you've applied a small amount like that, whilst it's still wet, just get rid of the excess paint off your brush. Just make sure your brush is damp, and what you can do is just start running either side of it like this, and that water will just help blend out that contrast paint into the surrounding area and give you a nice smooth transition from the contrast paint into the area around it. And there we are, with that contrast applied, we're now getting a really nice tonal variation across the fur of the wolf. But what we need to do now is just add a little bit more sharpness to the wolf's face, because it is the most important part of that part of the model. So what we're going to do now is go back to Administratum Grey and this time apply it as a highlight. So I'm going to be using a small airbrush to do this, and for this stage what you should do is use the palette to thin the paint down with a little bit of water to make sure it flows easily from the brush. So just get a little amount of paint there like that, and just a touch of water. Mix them together so you get a thinner version like this, and then just twist your brush to get rid of the excess paint so that you're not overloading it and putting on too much. And this way you have some nice control over where you're applying the paint, and what we need to do is just pick out the most sharpest raised areas on the face. Now the dry brushing will have helped to reveal a lot of this, so a really clear example is around the mouth just here. So what I'm going to do is just run this colour along the edge like that, just to get a lighter, sharp edge like that to finish that part off. We also want to be doing areas such as the brow, so just a little bit across there, and this part just coming down the side of the mouth, just there, like that. So you see it's not very much, just small amounts that really help finish it off. And a great bit to pick out here as well is, of course, the ears. And there we are, with that highlight of grey applied. We can now move on to painting in some smaller details on the miniature, and the first of these is going to be some black detail on it. Now for this we're going to use black Templar, which I'll be applying using a medium layer brush, which is a really good size for the kind of area that we're covering here. And you should use your palette again to make sure that your brush isn't overloaded with it, because these are quite small details we're going to be painting in now. First of all, we need to look for any black details that are on the wolf itself. So for example, we want to look for the little claws down here, so I just start colouring these in, such as the one down here and just along here. But also we need to paint in the nose as well. So for this, just around the end here, just apply a thin coat of black Templar like this. Now at this stage we should also keep an eye out for anything else that we want to be black. For example, we've got this spider that's on the base, so we should paint that using black Templar as well. And also we should look out for any black leather that's on the grot. So in this case we're looking at quite small details. For example, we've got this little one going around his forearm just here. And also we've got the back of the shield where the straps are attaching it to his arms. We just need to get the brush in there, just being really careful, and just start painting in those areas too. One last bit to paint in black at this stage is this leather strap that's running just along the top of the wolf along here. And there we are, we've now added those black details to the wolf and also started to paint in the black leather. And what we're going to do now is move on to painting all the various shades of brown leather that are on the miniature. And there's quite a few of these, and it's up to you whether you do them all or not. You could just limit yourself to one or two tones if you want to. We're going to show you all the different variations now if you want to do them all. First of all, what you're going to need is Dryad Bark, followed by Baylor Brown, then some Doomball Brown, and then finally we need some Mournfang Brown as well. Now we're going to be starting out with Dryad Bark, which I'm going to be applying with the medium layer brush again, and as with earlier when we're doing the grey, what you need to do is just get some of this paint onto your brush and put it onto your palette and thin it down with a touch of water so it's nice and smooth and flows easily from your brush. Also make sure that your brush isn't overloaded by just twisting it to get rid of the excess paint and bringing the bristles to a nice tip, and then you're ready to start applying it to the miniature. Now the darker leather on these ones, it appears on the armour that we've got here on the forepaws, so we're kind of doing this area going up here underneath the other piece of leather there, and the same is true on the other forepaw. And also we've got the area of leather that forms a saddle on the back here as well. With that darker leather done, we can now move on to the yellowish leather, and for this we need Baylor Brown. And the two main areas for this are this larger piece of leather that's on the front of the wolf down here, but also the jacket of the grot as well. Next we're ready to base coat all the red leather details using Doomball Brown, and for this we've got quite a few to cover. First of all we've got the grip of the sword, so along here, and then these trails we've got coming down here. We also need to paint the sash that's going around his waist, so just in there, and also these trails coming out the back along here. Now we also have this binding that's on the wolf's tail, so around here, and on the shield we need to both base coat the back of it, so all the way around here, and also the facing of it as well. So that's this little recess part that we've got kind of going down with this metal trim going around it. Now one final detail to base coat at this stage is also the quiver for the arrows, which is down here. And finally apply Mournfang Brown to the leather down here, and also the leather coming out the back of the helmet. And there we are, we've now finished base coating all those different tones of leather, and we can move on to base coating some other details onto the miniature. Now first of all we're going to be using Thunderhawk Blue to base coat his cloak, followed by Screamer Pink for the inside of the wolf's mouth. After that we'll need Rakarth Flesh for all the bone details, including the wolf's teeth, and also the fletchings on the arrows, and then finally we need some Gorthal Brown, and this is to paint the arrow shafts and the bow. But first of all, we need Thunderhawk Blue, which I'm going to be applying with a medium layer brush again, and the technique here is just like what we did previously, using the palette to make sure the paint's thinned down with a touch of water, so it's nice and smooth. There we go, and once you've done so, all you need to do is start base coating the cloak, and at this stage, just start being as neat as you can as you start working around the details that you base coated previously. Once the cloak is finished, you can move on to Screamer Pink, and this is for the inside of the wolf's mouth. So this includes the gums, and when you're doing these parts, just be as neat as you can just to paint these areas along here, just above the teeth. But also be sure to get the full of the inside of the mouth as well by just putting your brush on the inside like this. The next colour to apply is Rakarth Flesh. Now this is for all the bone detail, including such bones as along here, but also we need to make sure that we base coat in the teeth of the wolf at this stage too, and just be really neat as you get close to the Screamer Pink here. Just really take your time picking out these details. Now at this stage we also want to pick out one piece of leather, and that is this little pouch that we've got just down here. And also we need to make sure we base coat in the arrow fletchings as well around here. And finally base coat the arrow shafts and the bow using Gawthor Brown. And there we are with those colours now base coated. We're ready to move on to applying two more base colours to the miniature before we add any shade to it. And that is first of all going to be Balthazar Gold for all the bronze details, followed by Lead Belcher for all the silver details. First of all though, we need Balthazar Gold, and once again I'm going to use the medium layer brush to apply this, and as before, just use the palette to make sure you thin the paint down with a touch of water so it's nice and smooth before you start to apply it. Then all you need to do is start applying this to all the details that you want to be bronze. So for this miniature we need to take a look at the skull cap and the helmet, so around here, and also the small part of metal leading up to that wolf tail. Also we want to make sure that we base coat the hilt of the sword, so around here and down here. And then on the reverse of the model, what we need to do is to paint the rim of the shield, so that is around here, and these little lines going towards the middle. And also, if you want to, you can also base coat these little coins that we've got, such as just here, and also the cap on this wolf tail just here. And once that's done, you're then ready to apply Lead Belcher to the blade of the sword, and also the larger rings on the harness down here, such as just around here. We've now applied quite a lot of base coats across the miniature and are ready to shade them, and for this we're going to be using Agrax Earthshade. But once we finish doing that, we can then paint in the skin, and for this we'll base coat the skin using Warboss Green, and then we'll shade the skin using Biltang Green. And using a different shade for the skin will help it stand out from all the other details in the miniature and really give it some vibrancy in that colour. But first of all we need Agrax Earthshade, which I'm going to be applying again using the medium layer brush, and the reason for this is it's a good size for the kind of area we want to cover here. Now I'm going to use the palette again, not to thin the paint down at all, just to help me control how much I'm applying at once. Because what we need to do is to focus this just on the new colours we've added since we were painting the fur. So for example, this leather arm we've got down here, I want to apply it all over this area here, but just be careful as I get close to that fur and not bring the shade onto it, just right up to it there like that. So this is going to be all the leathers, the metals, and all these other details that we painted in ever since we applied the fur. Once the shade is completely dry, you're then ready to start base coating the skin using Warboss Green. Now when you're doing this, you just really need to take your time and really be careful as you're applying this to work around all the colours you painted in so far. Feel free to switch to a small airbrush if you need to access some of the smaller details. And with that base coat on the skin done, you're then ready to carefully apply Biltang Green all over the skin, once again using your medium layer brush. The shade on the skin is now completely dry, so now we can move on to the next phase of painting the miniature, which is to layer some colours onto it to brighten them up before we move on to highlighting them. First of all, we're going to do this with the skin by reapplying some Warboss Green to it, but then we're going to move on to adding some Wazdaka Red to the miniature, and then we're going to go back to Thunderhawk Blue for the cloak. But first of all we need Warboss Green, which I'm going to be applying with that medium layer brush once more, and this time the application is a bit more precise than what we did previously. So as before, use the palette to make sure that paint is thinned down and that it's flowing really easily from your brush. There we go. And then really importantly, make sure your brush isn't overloaded. Just twist it to bring the brushes together, get them to a nice point so you've got lots of control over where you're applying this. Because what we need to do is look carefully at these areas where the shade's been applied to them, and where the darker areas are, we want to avoid those parts. So if we take a look at this leg, for example, you can see there's a little darker line here where the shade settled in that recess. What I'm going to do is apply this colour to the foot, but avoiding that area there to retain the definition from the shade, whilst lightening up these raised areas like that. And the same will be true as we come down to the toes, so just running across those parts there, and the leg running up here. So all you need to do now is carry on doing this all across the skin, always looking out for those recessed areas and avoiding them. Once you finish the skin, you can move on to Wazdaka Red, and this is to layer the sash and also the face of the shield. And for this I'm using a small airbrush because these details are quite small. As before though, all you do is apply the colour to the flatter areas whilst looking for those recessed details and avoiding them. So you can see on the sash I'm just being really careful to pick out those raised areas. As for the shield boss, what we're looking for is this kind of recessed area here. So looking at the face around here, just not going quite up to the edges, so you keep the definition of the shade where it meets the brass. And once you've finished layering the red, you're then ready to layer with Thunderhawk Blue onto the cloak. And as before, all you need to do is apply this to the flatter areas and avoid those recessed areas where the shade is settled. And there we are, all the layering is done, so now ready to move on to highlighting the colours on the miniature. And first of all, we're going to highlight what is surely the most important one, and that is Ripper's skin. Now for this, what we need is Scarsnick Green, and then we're going to move on to highlighting all the black details, for which we need Dawnstone. And the technique for both of these is going to be exactly the same. What you need is a small airbrush because you need a fine point on it, and so a smaller brush like this is ideal for that. Starting out with Scarsnick Green, all I'm going to do is just load up a little bit of this and pop it onto the palette. And what you must do then is thin it down, because we're just ready to apply a very small amount of this just on the sharpest features of the skin. So you want to dilute it down to around about this consistency here, so it's a little bit transparent, and then just twist your brush to get rid of the excess paint, and you can always test it on your palette to see if you can paint some thin lines. There we go, it's a little bit too thick, so I'll add just a touch more water to that, and then test it once more. There we go, that's flowing a little bit better. So there we go, so we're now ready to start applying it to the miniature. So what I'm aiming to do is to pick out all the most defined features on the skin, and the face is a great example for this. The most obvious one on these grots is their nose, so all I'm going to do is paint a little bit just running down the line of the nose there, and a small amount just going along the side like that. Now also we want to pick out the cheekbone because that's very well defined, so just a little bit there, and also around the edges of the mouth as well. So just down there, for example, and along there. It's usually a good idea to leave the lower lip a little bit darker than the upper lip, so I'm going to avoid that, but just put a little bit on the chin there like that. So you see, by doing this, I'm just really bringing out all the features of the flesh. Now on smoother surfaces, such as the muscles, all you do is look for the crest of them where the light catches them. So for example, the shoulder here, all I'm going to do is just run a little bit of this colour along there like that, and a little bit along this muscle there like that. So all you do now is just carry on doing this all across the green skin. And with that skin highlighted, we can then highlight the black details using Dawnstone. And for this, we're looking at all the leather straps, such as the one just along here, following along all the edges once more. But also you want to highlight all the black details that are on the wolf. And this will include things such as the claws down here, for which you just need a little bit on the very end of them there like that. And also its nose as well, for which we just need a small amount on the tip just there. Once you've finished highlighting the skin and the black details, you're then ready to move on to highlighting all the different colours of leather. And for this, we're going to start out with Gawthor Brown for all the dark leather details, and then move on to Ungor Flesh, and this is going to be for that yellowish leather. After that, we need Tuskor Fur for the red details and also the reddish leather, and then finally, we're going to need some Scrag Brown for the remaining leather details. First of all though, we need Gawthor Brown, and the technique here is just the same as before. Using your small airbrush, you just need to make sure you got that paint thinned down because we're looking to just pick out the raised edges of these details. So make sure it's thinned down nicely and that your brush isn't overloaded. And once you've done so, you're looking for all that darker brown leather. So for example, we've got this piece up here, which is forming the saddle. All I'm going to do is look for the edges and just follow them all the way around. Once you've finished highlighting that detail, you can then move on to the yellowish leather, for which you need Ungor Flesh. And the technique is just the same as before, just really take your time following around all the sharper edges of these details, being particularly neat when you're going around the fur. Next up, we can highlight the red leather using Tuskor Fur, such as the detail just along here, but at the same time keep an eye out for the red details such as the sash and highlight these as well. And finally, highlight all the remaining leather details using Scrag Brown. And there we are, all the leather details have now been highlighted, and we just have a few more details left to highlight on the miniature, and we're going to complete those now. First of all, we're ready to finish off the cloak, and for this we need Fenrisian Grey, and then after that we're going to use some pink horror to finish the detail inside the mouths. Then we'll need Pallid Witch Flesh, and this is to finish all the bone detail, and also all the teeth and the fletchings on the arrows too. And then we're ready for the metallics. For this we need Sycorax Bronze for the bronze details, and Stormhost Silver for the silver details. But first of all we need Fenrisian Grey, and once again I'm going to use the small airbrush to apply this because the technique is just the same as what we did with the leather. As before, just use that palette to make sure your paint's nice and smooth and flowing easily from your brush, and also make sure that your brush isn't overloaded. And then what we're looking to do is to pick out all those edges once more. So on the cloak here you can see there's very defined fine edges going all the way around the outside, and all you need to do is just run the edge of your brush very lightly across those details there like that to get that nice highlight. But also you want to look out for the raised areas as well, the crests of these folds. So for example, the one running down here, what I'm going to do is just run a line, just running around the middle of that there like that to give it a nice highlight to finish it off. Once the cloak is completed, we can move on to pink horror to finish off the detail inside the mouths. Now for the wolf, we're talking about just the little bits of gums that you can see here. You can see I'm really bracing my hand so it's nice and steady, just so I can pick out a small line, just running along the edge of the gums there like that, just to give them a nice little highlight. Now also at this stage, if you want to, you can highlight Ripper's tongue, of which only a little bit of it's visible, but for this, all you need to do is just paint a little dot of pink in the middle of the mouth there, like that. With that done, you're then ready to finish off all the bone details using pallid witch flesh. So this of course involves doing the teeth, for which you just need to paint a little bit of this colour just towards the end of them like this, just to pick them out and make them appear nice and sharp. But also we need to keep an eye out for any bone details all around the model. So for example, we've got this little bone trinket hanging down here. All we need to do is just run down it like that, just to highlight it, and a little bit there at the bottom of it. Also, we've got this pouch that we painted earlier on, and we need to highlight this too. So like with all the leather and details, all you need to do is follow around all sharper edges and look out for any creases as well, and just pick them out there like that. Now one of the details to pick out at this stage is the arrow fletchings around here, and for this all you need to do is just make sure you don't have much paint in your brush. Just very lightly run it across the texture like this so that it catches the raised areas, and this way you get a nice highlight on that texture. We're now ready to highlight metallic details, starting out with the bronze, for which we need Psychorax bronze. And as before, we just look for the sharper edges and just follow along them with this colour. So on these are really nicely defined. As you can see on the hilt of the sword, all I'm doing is following along the raised area, just like that. And finally, highlight all the silver details using Stormhost Silver. Now it's at this stage as well that we also need to pick out all the studs that are in the leather, and for these it's just a matter of dotting the paint onto each of the raised areas. So just hold the model as steady as you can and just be as neat as you can, picking each of these out. And with those highlights applied, Ripper and his wolf are now complete, and all we need to do is to paint their base. And for this, what we're going to do is first of all neaten up all the rocks on it using Mechanicus Standard Grey, then paint all the dirt using Doomball Brown, and then shade over both these at the same time with Reikland Flesh Shade. But first of all, we need Mechanicus Standard Grey, which I'll be applying with a medium base brush, and as always, all you need to do is use your palette to get that paint ready. Just putting a bit on there like that, and then thinning it down with a touch of water, and then all we need to do is start painting in all those rocks. And that means really just painting in between the claws. For example, around here, just being as neat as you can as you paint them in. And this particular miniature, we also have a skull that's on the base here, which we're going to paint so it's really dusty and old. But make sure for this stage that you base coat this with Mechanicus Standard Grey as well. Once you've finished with the rocks, you're then ready to base coat in all the dirt using Doomball Brown, once again applied with a medium base brush. And with both those colours now blocked in, we're ready to shade all over the base using Reikland Flesh Shade. The only bit to avoid is the spider. Once the shade is completely dry, we're then ready to start dry brushing all the texture on the base to really finish it off. And for this, we need 3 different dry brushes. We're going to start out by dry brushing with Tuscaur Fur, and then we're going to start using some Ungor Flesh as a dry brush, but only on the dirt. And finally, we'll finish off the base by dry brushing all of it using Ushabtivone very lightly. But first of all, we need Tuscaur Fur, and I'm going to be using a small dry brush for this, so I've got lots of control over where we apply it. And what we need to do is just get some of that paint, work it into the bristles, get rid of the excess paint until there's only a small amount left on there. And what we're aiming to do here is to dry brush this only onto the dirt and also the rocks as well. So for example, around here, I'm going to start brushing it on so it catches that raised texture, and I'm going to bring it over those rocks very lightly to give a sort of dusty appearance to them. Next, lightly dry brush the dust using Ungor Flesh just to give it a little bit more warmth. And finally, lightly dry brush across the entire base using Ushabtivone to bring all the colours together and to really finish off that dusty appearance. And also whilst you're at it, if there are any bones on the base, really concentrate the colour on these details like that. Now once done this, all you need to do is paint the rim of the base of your miniature, and you can paint it whatever colour you like. But for this miniature, I'm going to go for a Baden Black. And with the rim of the base painted, Ripper is now complete, ready to lead his Snarfangs in their quest for revenge against the tribe that spurned them. So when you're painting this miniature, there's a few key things to remember, and the first is that it's a good idea to do the dry brushing on the wolf very early on, so that it doesn't matter if you catch other details that you've yet to paint, because you'll always neaten those up as you then paint them in later on. When you're applying the Agrax Earth shade to the miniature, be careful not to put on too much at once so that you don't lose control of it and get it onto features that you've already finished. And finally, when you're applying your highlights, always remember to take your time and be as neat as you can. But there you are. We really hope you've enjoyed this video, and most of all, we really hope you have lots of fun painting these miniatures because they are fantastic and they're packed with character. They're just really fun. So enjoy yourself, and we'll see you all again very soon.